Welcome back to Following Know It On, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 65, and we are going through chapters 34 through 37 of Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. Now, I have actually been looking forward to this episode since, maybe episode 6 of this podcast, where we had a very interesting little bit where we've had made a reoccurring. So I'll talk about that more in here in a second. But how are you, Elliot? We'll start with that.
I'm doing good. We talked last time about wanting more action going forward. I don't know that we necessarily got that, but still some fun parts in this chapter. And I am really excited to see Paul make a fool of himself.
Paul, how are you?
Stressed. a little bit stressed. Last week I did say I will probably never miss a spell check. I'm gonna stick with it, but we'll see.
All right, so yes, the elephant in the room is we've been introduced to Rock's wife on this episode. Rock has been finally reunited with his family, and when we get to our spell check, Paul's gonna have to try to spell Rock's wife's name. But before we get there, can we get 2 words to summarize this episode? We'll start with you, Elliot.
So I chose for my 2 words for these chapters to be social expectations.
Social expectations. Yeah, I like that. And Paul, your 2 words.
So my first word is misunderstandings. My second word is apostrophes. in lieu of our spell check today.
Wonderful. Let's use these 4 words and talk about Oathbringer. All right. So let's talk about Elliot's first, and then we can use Paul's 2 words to push us into our spell check, which we'll get to shortly. But we'll talk about Elliot's first. Go ahead.
So for 2 in a row episodes wise here, I'm pairing my 2 words together into a phrase, if you will. This time with social expectations. I feel like there's multiple instances across these chapters where a character is being kind of either put into a box or fulfilling a very certain role or feeling like they're supposed to be fulfilling a certain role when maybe that isn't necessarily the case. And the first example of that is Dalinar. So we're going to talk about how he visits the queen of Thalen City. Thalena? Yeah. And she has some misconceptions about him and what he's trying to do, and they have a little bit of a connection there. Then later on we have some interesting discussion with Sigil and Kaladin about a few different kind of social expectations. Well, we might talk about that when we get to that chapter. And then Renarin, we get to learn a little more about Renarin and how he sees kind of the struggles that he is dealing with living up to his older brother Adolin and kind of the expectations that his father has for him or the expectations that Renarin thinks his father has for him. And then lastly, even Rock himself. I think we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about Rock when we get to chapter 37, but he feels like he has to be a cook when we get a lot of kind of hints of maybe there's so much more to him. Is he being unfairly forced into this role, or is that really what he wants to be? Well, lots of sort of kind of where do I fit into society questions I felt like across these chapters.
Yeah, good. Paul?
So my first word is misunderstandings, and it mostly had to do with like the Sigil chapter and just kind of, I don't know, there's a lot of conversation that happened that I don't know. I feel like maybe we had some misunderstandings of the characters, or like I don't know. There's just kind of a lot going on, so I kind of just did that as an encompassing thing throughout that, and that was my primary motivation. And my second word, apostrophes, is simply just a joke for our spell check today.
Good luck with
And
that.
All right, we'll get the first. We'll jump right into the spell check just to take the bull by the horns for you, Paul, and not keep you waiting any longer because I know you really want to do this.
I'm so excited. I'm
All right,
just
first one we'll throw you a softball. There's a new Herdazian in Bridge 4, and Elliot, do you have that name in front of you? Would you like to try to say that name?
Sure. This is the guy that like throws some spices in Rock's food, and Rock gets mad about it, but then is like, "Oh wow, that's actually awesome."
Yep.
His name is clearly got to be Huio, I think. Maybe.
Paul?
Yes, I believe that's right. It's Huio. Huio, roughly. And so for Herdezian here, um, I was nervous about one thing, which I'll talk about, but for spelling, I went with Huijo. I went with a J for
So
like the
close.
like the Y sound, but I don't know if it was literally a Y.
You are close, but there's no J. It's just Huio, Huio. He's not
Oh wow, okay, yeah, that's odd.
he's not a Lethe, and the Lethe use or I actually should say
Orin?
yes, thank you, Vorin. He's not Vorin, so they don't use that J as the Y sound like Yakovet and Yasna and that type of thing. So it's just there's no J, but other than that, you were correct. All right, and now the moment everyone has been waiting for. Everybody's kind of looking at Paul, but Elliot gets an interesting bit here too. So Rock finally gets reunited with his family, and Rock drops the name of his wife, and the name of his wife is Elliot.
All right,
It's
I'm
not
sure I'm going to
Elliot.
butcher this. It's going to be. I hope not.
I'm sorry.
So the name of Rock's wife, I'm probably going to butcher this, but her name is Song. Right? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not wrong.
That was funny.
Smart answer.
Okay, fine. I know you're looking for the Horn Eater, whatever their crazy language name is. So
I am.
I'll give a shout at that. So here we go. Her name is Tuaka'li'na'calmi'nor.
Perfect.
That is correct. That's how.
Yeah.
That's how.
Wow, sweet.
Yeah.
Michael Kramer says it.
Tuaka'li'na'calmi'nor.
The sounds are all fairly straightforward when you're reading it. It was kind of just a question of where's the emphasis and like combination of sounds, but I don't think it was nearly as hard as Rock's name when we first came across that one. But good luck spelling it.
Yeah,
that one.
That was a doozy. All right.
All right.
Okay.
Your turn.
So spelling for this, should I try it with apostrophes? I'll do it with apostrophes. We'll go the whole shebang. So the name Tuaka'li'na'calmi'nor, I had TU apostrophe AKA apostrophe LINA apostrophe KALM apostrophe INOR.
Wow.
Okay, so
Wow.
you are extremely close. You're not 100%, but you're very, very close. Your apostrophes are off, which is like it's understandable. And you have a K instead of a C.
Okay.
And
I debated on that for a while.
And other than that, you were perfect. You had.
I have a question.
Yeah, go.
Well, okay. One, I chose a K because I was like, okay, the Horn Eaters, I feel like they're more like brash with their like. They have a lot of like K sounds and stuff, and so I chose K. Also, I wanted to ask: is the last apostrophe supposed to be before the M and after the L? Is that where I slipped up? Because I debated on that for a while.
No.
Okay, that's fine. I thought it may have been like a call Minor, or I didn't know if it was that, or like calm Enor.
So I'll say it with the apostrophes in it with the heavier weight. So it's Tuaka Li Na Calmi'nor.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so the apostrophes are off.
Correct.
That's
and
right.
and there's really no way you could gather that based on how they say it in the audiobook, because they say Lena, and there's an apostrophe in there. So
yeah, that is actually really tough. Yeah, I would have never split up the Lena part there.
Yeah.
Never. Goodness. Okay.
Nice job. I'm proud.
Well done.
I'm proud of that. Though.
Yeah.
I'm proud of
Well
it.
done.
I'm proud of you too. It's a solid 98% accuracy. So nice job.
That's good.
All right. Now that we have our that segment out of the way, the real content of the podcast is coming your way. Chapter 34. I really like this chapter, and it's not necessarily because of the content specifically. It's because as a first time reader, this was one of my favorite visions that we'd ever seen Dalinar in, and based on the ending of part 1, this was the one that I wanted to revisit with somebody, and we get it immediately. So Dalinar chooses this vision, the one that's like maybe the most action packed, to bring Queen Fen in too, and to try to talk to her. And there's some cool things that happen later in this chapter. But did you guys have a similar feeling that you really wanted to revisit this this vision that we've seen? We've referenced this many times throughout the podcast. So what were you guys' thoughts revisiting this vision?
Was definitely high on my list as well of ones I wanted to see again, just for a couple of reasons. One, it was a really exciting one, so to get to see it again, maybe from a different perspective, would be fun. But then also to take what we've learned since then and kind of come back and apply that new lens to, okay, what are these Night Radiants doing? We know what they're capable of now. We know kind of what their purpose is, so that helps us a lot. But I agree with kind of what you maybe hinted at, Trevor, that this is absolutely not the vision that I would have picked to go have a conversation with someone in. Like, go pick the quiet one where he's just like chatting with Noadon to, have a chance to sit down and have a conversation with Fen. Not the, oh, here, yeah, middle of a battle, good luck having oh, by the way, can you come to your theory and talk with me, or whatever he wants. It was, not a wise choice.
Yeah, I had to say I was excited to see this, especially because we've theorized a bit about this vision of like, okay, were these Midnight Essence something to do with Ray Shapir, our unmade that we've seen, or things like that, which I don't think I got any kind of real answer with that, which wasn't
You did actually. Dalinar had a comment as he's flying towards he gets subbed into the whatever the second Knight's Radiant is that's with the Windrunner. And as he's in the vision, he's like, wait a minute, why did I drop her in the middle of fighting these Midnight Essence? he has that realization, and then he has this offhand comment of Shallan just met the origin of these things. So you did get a confirmation from Dalinar that they're tied.
Okay. Well, that's pretty cool to see that now. But yeah, it was definitely interesting, and it was cool to see. And just being honest, this is something that I would love to see in the if there was ever a screen adaptation of this whole storyline of the Stormlight Archive. Just because we're seeing the same scene again, but played out entirely differently. And I think that's just a cool thing. I don't know, really neat to see. And stuff. So yeah, it was very interesting. But yeah, whenever he actually starts talking to the Thaylen Queen, it's just awkward. She's like, "What? Why did we do this? Like why didn't you write me a letter? Like, you had to do this."
Before we actually get to the vision itself, though, there was actually one other thing I wanted to bring up and talk with you guys about, and that's a kind of a nuance with the Stormfather. Like, as Dalinar is going into the vision, he enters into like a waiting room for a little bit
He
before he
does.
goes into the actual thing. And he's asking the Stormfather, like, what the heck is this? It's like all white, or I don't even remember how it's quite, described. And then he has an interesting conversation about it with the Stormfather. The Stormfather's like, oh, well, I just imagine this place to be, I forget exactly what, a waiting place for Spren or something like that. But then he goes on even further and talks about how when an object dies, I think he uses an example of like a vase. When a vase in the physical realm is smashed, it dies, in quotes. But its corresponding spren, this whole kind of concept of inanimate objects have a soul, if you will, in the shape of their spren. So the vase spren. He talks about the vase spren continues existing until it is forgotten, until the people, I suppose, forget that those shards on the ground, I guess, were meant to be a vase. That's when the spren dies. And just kind of that whole idea of imagination and the thoughts forming the existence of the spren was all really interesting. Completely irrelevant to the rest of this chapter, but kind of interesting.
I want to stop here and pull this thread a little more because it has really nothing to do with Roshar or the Stormlight Archive or anything. But have you guys seen Coco? The Disney movie Coco?
I have not.
With the guitar playing? Oh, yeah, you gotta go see it, man. It's a good one.
It's the whole
music.
The whole concept of Coco is Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, that's celebrated in Mexico specifically, and they keep their ancestors alive by remembering them and celebrating the Day of the Dead. And if you don't do that so in the realm of the dead, your ancestors live on and have their own community as long as people remember them. But if you start forgetting them, then they finally pass on and die a second time. And it's kind of the similar thought here of, as long as we keep remembering our ancestors here, they'll live on in the spiritual realm over there. But if you start forgetting them and if you don't have anybody to remember you after death, then you'll die that second time and not be remembered by anyone. So same kind of concept here.
I had not made that parallel, but that's brilliant, actually. That similarity there, that makes a lot of sense. The only weird part about this one in this world is we're talking about inanimate objects now. We're talking about, like, I go out and I build something with my hammer, but I break my hammer as I'm doing it. Well, now my hammer's broken, so I throw it away. I'm gonna forget about that hammer pretty quick. Like, by the end of the day, I've probably forgotten about my hammer. And so to us, that doesn't mean anything. I broke my hammer, forget about it, I'll go get a new one, in the next day. But does that have much more important implications in the spren world? Is the spren of that hammer more important than I realized? Like, is that important or is it not? Like, this is now bringing up some weird questions for me of this, trying to understand what's going on in the spren world and is it important?
Yeah.
But anyway, that was a bit of a sidebar. We can probably go back to talking about Dalinar and what's the name of the Thaylen queen lady? Fen?
Yeah, Queen Fen.
Okay.
Just real quick, any guesses as to what type of Knights Radiant Dalinar is in this vision? We know his buddy who's lashed him is a Windrunner. Any guesses as to what he is?
I know that part of the complaint that the Windrunner had is like, why aren't you healing people, right? So I'm assuming he's one of there are two that can heal, right?
Correct.
Isn't it the Truth Watcher and is it the Truth Watcher and the Light Weaver?
It is not the Light Weaver.
Weavers don't do that. No, we know what they do. That was silly. As far as I know, it's the Truth Watcher and another. And I think he's a Truth Watcher because I think that would be cool and more significant because Renarin is. a Truth Watcher as well.
True. So you actually know the second one as well. Do you?
I know you told us all of them at one point.
Well, you've read the second one. Lift
yes,
heals her buddy, who's
right.
the
Edge Dancer. Okay.
Yes, so he's either an Edge Dancer or a Truth Watcher.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Elliot, are you still here?
I am still here. I came to the same conclusion. Interestingly, my answer to your question changes based on the rest of the reading for this episode. Like, we find out later in chapter 37, I think, although Renarin talks about his surges in that chapter. He talks about how as a Truth Watcher he has illumination and
progression,
which I think we already kind of knew, right? We knew that he could heal as a Truth Watcher. So I suppose I should have known that at this point. But yeah, Truth Watcher or Edge Dancer. Correct. I don't know which one. Maybe Truth Watcher. That would be interesting, like you said, Paul.
I think that would be cool because it could end up being some kind of similarity or things like that where he can see into Renarin's perspective a little more, which would be something neat, but it could very well not be as well.
So the way the vision itself plays out is actually really interesting. Trevor, I think you noted this in our outline. It kind of happens differently, but kind of gets to the same point eventually. It kind of goes down different paths, but then it ultimately gets to the moment where the Knight Radiant is saying, wow, you have good leadership skills. You should come to Urithiru and join the Knights Radiant, or whatever that part is. But
we want you for
yeah, right. But yeah, interesting that it happens differently, and that Fen kind of approaches it differently than Dalinar did. But yeah, I was kind of honestly torn a bit in this chapter between, do I pay attention to how the vision is happening, or do I pay attention to the conversation that Dalinar and Fen are trying to have? I was a little like, my attention was split a little bit.
If you think your attention is split, imagine Queen Fen and her attention.
This is why this was a terrible idea of Dalinar's to pick this vision. Like, let's put her in the most stressful one where she has to deal with this crazy, scary situation. Oh, and then also I'd like to have a heart-to-heart conversation with you about how I'm not the man you think I am, and you really should join me. Like, okay, Dalinar.
It was very odd, but it worked.
It did. It did actually work by the end.
Yes, ish.
Yeah.
So as Dalinar is flying there, he has this moment of like, wait, what if I just like make her really angry that she's now torn in half, and I'm trying to, have this conversation with her, but she figures it out and sacrifices poor what's her face. I don't remember her name, but the dialogue that the other Knights Radiant has at the end of the vision is very interesting because it's different, but also similar to what Dalinar hears. Because when Dalinar gets the vision, at the end of the vision, he turns to him and is like, hey, you're a great fighter. You should come to Urithiru. And then at this one, he turns to Queen Fen. It's like, hey, you're a great leader. You organized all these people. Come to Urithiru. So based on like what, Dalinar just wants to like, oh, you're putting me in a fight? I'm going to fight. There's no other option. And then Queen Fen, runs and gets the rest of the town together and creates a little resistance against the whatever. So there's the same concept, but different specific differences between the two of them.
I think my only other takeaway out of this chapter really was kind of the thoughts Dalinar's having about, hey, we should study these visions. We should like get Navani and Yasna in here and get them to, go over kind of inch by inch what's in here. And the Stormfather keeps responding to this with, and they've kind of had this conversation before with like, oh no, these visions are just, here to do one purpose and don't read into it too deeply. I can't really show you more. But then it seems like this is a perfect example of it plays out slightly differently, and they kind of learn a little bit more because it went a little bit differently. So I think Downer has a point. I think they should, use this as an opportunity to learn as much as they can about the Knights Radiant and Noadon and Honor and anything that they can get their hands on that might be useful in this upcoming war with the Voidbringers, this desolation that they're facing. And the Stormfather just kind of blows it away as, no, not important.
Funny. That was funny.
Blows it away.
Yes.
Like that.
Do you think we're gonna see? I don't know. Did we find out if Dalinar is going to continue using this to like reach all the different people, or like is he gonna learn from this and be like, oh, that kind of worked. Maybe I'll do the same vision again, or is he gonna like do one where he can just like more chill talk to them, or what? Because I mean, this happened with Fen here, but like this has been kind of his plan for a week or so, or a couple days or so of like, okay, I can do this with visions to like reach people.
It seemed to me like he's planning to keep doing this with other people, but yeah, I don't know whether he's going to learn from this and do something different, or if we're just going to see different versions of the same vision over and over, which might be interesting if that actually would happen. But yeah, it seems like he'd be maybe a little more productive to use a different one.
Mm-hmm.
The one, Elliot, you mentioned this earlier, but the one where he just is having a conversation with Noadon would be, I feel like, a good one, because they're looking at the end of a desolation. They finally won the war, Noadon has, and he's having an existential crisis of, well, I mean, we won the war, but now what, But he could use that vision and be like, look what's going to happen to Roshar. Please join me. I need your help. So he could definitely use that vision to help.
Yeah, exactly.
Any more thoughts on 34 before pushing to some desperately needed Bridge 4 content for me?
Let's do it.
All right, so we haven't really seen Bridge 4 since the end of The Way of Kings. The Way of Kings is, Bridge 4's book. It's Kaladin's book. It's very zoomed in. I'm going to tell you a story about Kaladin and Bridge 4, and you're not really going to worry about the rest of Roshar. And now we've zoomed all the way out, and you've got the whole of Roshar, the whole existential crisis of the human race on your mind here against the Voidbringers. And we finally get more Sigil content, more Rock content later, because they've been in this story, but not really. Like, they definitely took a backseat for Words of Radiance, because it was Shallan's book, and we were learning more about the Knights Radiant, and they weren't there yet. So, but now they kind of are getting there, and Kaladin is starting the Windrunners. He is kind of planting his flag as the leader of the Windrunners, and Bridge 4, anyone who wants to can be trained as a Windrunner. And Sigil in this chapter brings up a lot of very interesting dynamics and points of, okay, are we an Alethi military force? Do we answer to Dalinar? Do we answer to Elokar? Like, what if, he's got all sorts of these questions. What did you guys think of this chapter?
Just real briefly, and then I want to hear what Paul thought. I like this Sigil guy. He's a lot like me. He'll read something or experience something, and then just write down a whole bunch of questions. Like, I get this guy. I totally get it. He's going through like, what about this? What about this? Oh, but what? Well, hold on a second. What about this? Like, I'm with you, Sigil. That's me too.
I was really excited to have like a Sigil chapter, because he was definitely like, if not my favorite Bridgeman, then like my second favorite. Like, he's one of the coolest, I think. One of the ones I was most curious about, like right out of the gate.
I do want to say real quick, I don't want to interrupt you too badly, Paul, but I was a little actually surprised by Sigil's perspective here. The image I've kind of gotten in my mind of him up until this point is the like quiet, confident one in the group where he doesn't say a whole lot, but when he does say something, you better listen because it's going to be important, sort of thing. Now that we're inside Sigsil's head, there's a lot more like hesitancy and uncertainty from his perspective. Like Sigsil, now that we're with him, kind of seeing it through his eyes, is much more like, I'm not really sure about this. Maybe we should try this, or what about this? And are we doing the right thing here? That's not the Sigil that I kind of had seen up until this point. So interesting and actually extremely well written, I think, to do that, to show that makes perfect sense, right? That someone can kind of show a confident, quiet, and calm exterior when on the inside they're still questioning everything. They're still, is this really what we're going to do? And then when they say something, oh yeah, well, I'm a world singer, I know everything, and we're going to do this. And then on the inside, he actually is doubting what's going on. So I think pretty brilliantly written here.
I agree with you on that a lot, Elliot. Because I always had the perception that he was very confident and he was just like the knowledgeable one.
Yeah.
He knew a whole lot about everything. He was very smart. And now we're seeing him like have more doubt or less confidence in himself. And yeah, I didn't fully know what to make of this chapter. I feel like it was just some development between him and Kaladin, stuff like that, but nothing super major. I would say our biggest, in my mind, the biggest like development chapter was our rock chapter, but the Sigil chapter was also really neat. I just didn't have as much of a takeaway from it, honestly.
We do get an introduction of a new character in this chapter. She's kind of she gets maybe a page of content. She walks up to Kaladin, and she's obviously interested in Bridge 4 and wants to, hang out with them. And Kaladin kind of turns to her, and because on Kaladin's mind, he's like, "Oh, we need a scribe," is what he's thinking. Like, we need somebody to do our ledgers and write a history of Bridge 4, that type of thing. And he's got this scout girl next to him, and so normal like gender norms for the Alethi are women can write and men can't. So he turns to the first woman he sees, this woman scout next to him. It's like, "Hey, do you want to join Bridge 4? And she takes that as, "Hey, do you want to be trained as a windrunner?" And that's not what he means. He means, "Hey, do you want to write all of our stuff for us because you're a woman?" And Sigil has a line in his, like, we're in his point of view. He has a thought. He's like, he wants to just punch Kaladin in the face because of what he just said, like, not really knowing, like, not really thinking about it. But Lynn obviously wants to fully be in Bridge 4. She wants to be trained in the spear like everybody else was. She wants to be trained as a windrunner. And Kaladin has that opportunity because, as Lynn points out, Shallan is a full Knight's Radiant. She has a shard blade. She's doing everything that Kaladin's doing, so why can't Lynn? And so she kind of stands up for herself and says, there were Knights Radiant that were women in the past. I want to be a part of that. And then Kaladin's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, we can go down that route. I didn't really think about that, but sure." And so he invites her to do the tryout, which we see later in chapter 37, which is part of that. So
yeah, and all of that came kind of right after a discussion where Kaladin was kind of challenging Sigil a little bit of, be careful about imposing your moral beliefs on other people. And, Sigil is kind of saying, I feel like our group needs a moral, someone who's morally responsible for the group. It seems like he's, applying to be chaplain of the group, where he wants to be, someone who's thinking about are we doing the right thing? He even mentions that there's, I think, 4 different religions represented within the Bridge 4, which that was an interesting comment there. And Kaladin kind of challenges him there and says, "Hey, help people be who they're meant to be, not necessarily who you think they should be." Which right. I thought actually was a really good little quote there. But then it what follows is what you just described, this scenario where Kaladin then goes and makes some assumptions about Lynn and this woman who wants to become, part of Bridge 4. So interesting back and forth here between Kaladin and Sigil, I thought.
And each of them have their strengths here, where Sigil is
Yeah.
putting himself in Lynn's shoes, and then Kaladin's putting himself in Huio's shoes, because like
Yep.
Sigil thinks that Huio is, disrupting the chemistry of Bridge 4, and Kaladin's like, it's really okay. That's what Bridge 4 is about, is inclusion and making sure that you're welcome here. Because, I mean, I would say, I don't know, I haven't really thought about it, but I would say probably 30-40% of the members of Bridge 4 are Alethi, and then the rest of them are kind of sprinkled in other races. So there's certainly a lot of diversity in Bridge 4, and Kaladin's like, no, that's a strength of ours, and we need to be okay with that.
Yeah, I thought it was a very interesting kind of where do we go from here chapter of, okay, we've gotten to the point where we can now worry about these kinds of questions. We've survived Bridge 4. We're alive. We're now, okay, bodyguards. Okay, now we're windrunners. Well, now what? Like, who are we as windrunners? That's kind of some of the stuff that's getting dove into. One of those two.
Dovid?
Yep.
Yeah.
Dove in.
Paul, you're a windrunner. What does it mean to be a windrunner? Go.
It means that you can fly whether or not people want you to. And sometimes that ruffles some feathers, no pun intended, but like
Hot.
that I don't have anything for you. I wish I had more. I'm failing as a windrunner right now.
It's okay. You're a fledgling windrunner. It's okay.
I am a fledgling. Is it?
Any more for 35 before we talk about Evie and some flashback Dalinar?
I'm ready to move on.
All right. Evie's pregnant, and we're assuming with Adolin, that's not confirmed for us, but we're assuming, Adolin might have a long lost older sister or something like that. We don't know. And Evie has some interesting dialogue in this chapter, and we get some new information towards the end of it. But what were you guys' impressions of this flashback chapter?
I felt like two big revelations in this one bigger than the other. The first one's smaller. Evie mentions the Night Watcher, which we're on the hunt for kind of unraveling what happened with Dalinar and the Night Watcher. So this felt like really valuable information, but it doesn't really support necessarily the kind of storyline we've been going with. It actually presents a potential other possibility, I feel like. Evie mentions that if Dalinar wants to speak with the One, which is like part of her Western Roshar religion of how they, God, basically, if he wants to speak with God, he should just go talk to the Night Watcher. And Dalinar just kind of shrugs it off of, that's superstitious craziness. I would never go talk to the Night Watcher. That's silly. But we know that he does go talk to the Night Watcher at some point. And we've kind of been assuming it to this point that he does so to remove some sort of pain or burden that he's carrying. What if he just goes because Evie asked him to? What if he just goes because he wants to support her in her religion later on? Or maybe we know she dies. So when she does die, he thinks, I want to honor her last wish or something and go talk to the Night Watcher. Like, I feel like there's more possibilities now of reasons why he might want to do that.
And the second revelation?
Second one, big one here. So a couple chapters ago, I don't remember how long ago this was, we saw Dalinar acquire his Shardblade, Oathbringer. And we talked quite a bit about that event because it involved Dalinar the Blackthorn assumedly murdering a young boy in order to get that blade.
Correct.
And I know I at least knocked on him pretty hard for that. And we kind of pointed to that as a, oh, look how terrible Dalinar the Blackthorn is. Well, now we figure out he didn't kill that boy. It comes out in this chapter that not only did he not kill that boy is back, and his people want their shard blade back. And that's kind of the plot point in this of Gavilar's like, hey man, I thought you took care of this. But the big revelation is, well, hang on a second, that changes a lot. Instead of this being a moment of, wow, look how terrible Dalinar was, now it's like, oh, wait a second, is this a turning point for Dalinar? Is this the terrible Dalinar finally coming to something that he's not willing to do and actually thought about and realized, oh, I can't kill this young boy because that's wrong, and he doesn't. So a lot of things just changed for me reading this chapter, actually.
And in light of this, if you remember back to the other chapter, setting up that scene, he's waist deep in the thrill. He's running after this other shard bearer that he's been denied this kill, and he runs into this secret hideout that he's in, and he presumably kills the guy that he's chasing. And then the screen goes black. We jump to him after the battle, and he's sitting there visibly shaking because he's so. What we've been assuming up to this point, he's just killed this child, and
right.
He's the aftermath of that. But did he have some sort of backlash control of the thrill in that moment because he was able to control himself and have mercy for that child? So there's a very interesting light of that last scene there of him at the end of the battle with Oathbringer, on his lap or whatever, and he's very visibly shaken, but he has spared this child that we've now found out. So,
Paul, was this as earth-shattering or big a moment for you, or not so much? What were you thinking when this revelation came?
It was pretty big, but it wasn't enormous, I guess. It honestly took me a little while to realize with the kid. It was kind of like my second read through. I kind of put those pieces together. But it is a big deal, and so throughout this book, I've imagined that we will see the progression from the Blackthorn to more of the Dalinar as we know him now, to be more honorable and concerned with doing what's right, maybe. And I from what I can guess, this is kind of that glimpse of that, and maybe a little twinkle in the distance of our good Dalinar. So yeah, that was a pretty neat thing to see. Yeah.
and
My other, if you have more to add, we can. I have another point about this chapter I would like to get to.
I'll throw it back to you here in a second, but I don't want to gloss over the effect this has on Evie. Evie is thrilled. Funny. She's elated, I should say, to that,
very happy
for the news that Dalinar does have some mercy, even on the battlefield. She knows he's at this juggernaut on the battlefield and gonna kill everything in his way, and she learns that he did spare this young child, and even if it's gonna cause problems for Gavilar later, she doesn't care. She's just so happy that he's human, I guess, that he has this softer side to him, and he can actually be a compassionate father figure, if you will, for this child coming.
I'm glad you said that, because that kind of plays into what I was going to talk about. For one, half of me thinks, wow, if we're considering the simple fact he didn't kill a child to be oh, he has a compassionate side, I feel like that's a bit generous.
Right.
But it is better than the alternative of having killed the child, right? So that is good news, and honestly, it makes me happy for Evie. What I was gonna say is, some of these flashback chapters make me a little bit sad because I see Dalinar and Evie's relationship, and we see it from Dalinar's perspective of like almost like it's a chore or kind of a bother to like go about this relationship.
Right.
And it kind of annoys me a little bit. He's like, okay, he'll like put his arm around her or something, like for show, like as he's kind of like expected to, and just stuff like that is kind of like it kind of sad to see. And I was like, wow, I hope Evie is like happy. I don't know. Um, and it was kind of nice to see like a little bit of a like redeeming quality and something there that Evie could be happy about. So I really liked that, and that was something that I wanted to bring up.
That's a good point, actually. So many of our characters lately, I feel like we've been looking for hidden motives and, double agendas and trying to figure out what they're doing. And here we just kind of have poor Evie kind of thrust into the middle of this. Maybe she does have a hidden agenda and is going to, turn out to be way more than we think. But also maybe she is just, kind of stuck in the middle of this and is, stuck married in this political marriage where Dalinar just kind of sees her as a chore and a political check the box. So yeah, that's a good point.
Any more thoughts on our flashback? All right. Rock has been reunited with his family by the end of this chapter, but we'll get there. Eliot, you have in our outline minor note on epigraph. Would you like to share? We can start.
Yeah, real brief. We don't have a lot of actual information to answer this question, but the epigraph, trying to flip to it real fast, in the beginning of this chapter, mentions a couple names that rang a bell for me, and so I had to do a little bit of digging. The epigraphs, we haven't really talked about epigraphs too much, but the epigraphs for this part 2 seem to be, again, just kind of a conversation between, we don't know who. They're not labeled with like who's speaking or where they're coming from, so we have no idea. And so because of that, I've kind of been writing them off as, well that means nothing to me now.
I'll pause you real quick. The first part 1's epigraphs are labeled of being excerpts from Oathbringer. Part 2 are not. So
yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you for that clarification. You're absolutely right. Oathbringer in part 1. Part 2, unlabeled, not quite making sense. Because of that, I've kind of now gone into the mode of I don't really read them too much, or I don't reread them too much, because you kind of pass it like, well, that makes no sense. It'll maybe make sense to me someday. But this one, chapter 37, mentions 3 names: Rays, Aona, and Sky. I don't know if I'm pronouncing those right at all, but I read those and I was like, wait a second. We've heard those names before. And I had to go digging to find them. But what I did find was they show up in very similar sounding epigraphs in The Way of Kings. If you go back to the part 1 of Way of Kings.
I'm so proud of you, Eliot. Keep going. I'm so
impressed.
proud.
I am very impressed.
The epigraphs from that part 1 mention these names and almost seem like a similar conversation. I was flipping through just a couple of them and reading some of them to the point where now I'm thinking that those epigraphs and these epigraphs are coming from the same person or the same source, or at least the same group of people that involves apparently Rays, Aona, and Sky. Still not enough to really tell us who the heck these people are or why they're important. I remember now thinking back to Way of Kings, I think I did the same thing I'm doing now of, well, that makes no sense. I'm going to keep reading this chapter and maybe it'll make sense someday. I'm still 3 books in at the same place, but I at least have 2 parts that I can tie together. So maybe when I do get the final key that unlocks this, I know where to look to go back and reread and be like, oh, that makes sense now.
I'm very impressed.
I just think it's so funny.
Those are some big dots to connect.
Yeah, you have this little straw that doesn't connect to anything, and you've been
Yes.
carrying it for 2,000
Yes.
some
Yep.
pages, and you're like, this was the same color. They go together. I don't know why, but they go together.
Yeah,
You are
exactly. That's
absolutely
exactly what I was
correct.
thinking, Trevor. It's actually so funny. It's like, wait, guys, I found it. I found it. Like, I found the missing piece.
What did you find?
And it's
What did you find? I don't know, but
it's
I
like
found it.
it's like a puzzle, and we found two pieces of it, and we found them that they go together, but we have no idea what the puzzle is. Like, we have no clue, but these two pieces do go together. Like, they fit together. So
That is a perfect analogy, Paul. I feel like I'm trying to solve 25 different puzzles at the same time, and I just realized that two of my pieces come from the same puzzle. And that's a
Yeah.
big moment. It's a big moment, guys.
Good stuff. That's really funny, actually.
Nothing to do with the chapters, but I got excited
Incredible.
about that epigraph.
Mhm.
All right. So, at the end of chapter 35, it kind of clicks for Sigil what Kaladin's about to do for his Windrunners. He borrows the Emerald Treasure Trove from, we assume, Dalinar, Elkar, somebody, and it's the bounty from the Chasm Fiends that they've been harvesting for, 5-6 years on the Shattered Plains, and they've been infused with Stormlight, freshly infused with Stormlight, and he takes them out to the Shattered Plains. He takes the Oathgate to the Shattered Plains and has this little training session with the Windrunners. He has his first prep speech of like, when I trained you guys to be Bridge 4, I knew the spear. I'm now training you to be Windrunners. I have no idea what I'm doing. So let's just kind of go with this step at a time, and we'll figure this out. And so that's just the scene that we've been jumped into right here, but it's from Rock's perspective. And Rock is kind of reserved, set aside from the rest of this scene, as he has been throughout the story. Rock's kind of set himself apart from everybody else, and he's the cook, and he's gonna make the food and not gonna fight. So everybody else is kind of trying to learn how to fly, and Rock's not really, or trying to stuck in Stormlight. First of all, let's start with square one, and Rock isn't really trying it himself until a little bit later in the chapter, but he's kind of just observing and watching everybody and having a couple conversations. So what were your guys' thoughts on our first Rock point of view chapter?
I thought it was a really cool chapter. I actually really enjoyed getting Rock's view on some of this. He's been a really interesting character. He's one of my favorites, really, from Bridge 4. So to get to see his view of the world was pretty cool. Honestly, I kind of felt like it seems like Rock is one of those people that just, like, everyone feels comfortable talking to them. If you've ever met one of those people, you start a conversation, then before you know it, you're like sharing things you never really meant to share with anyone else. He's just like that kind of person that's easy to talk to. And he doesn't even do anything. He just, listens and kind of has pithy little sayings that he spouts out. But that seems to be Rock. Like, everyone just kind of comes to him and shares their struggles and their moments, and like that's just who he is.
Definitely. Like, I think the biggest thing I learned, or I kind of knew this was the case, but saw really fleshed out, was Rock's like deep reverence for Spren. I feel like we got a lot of his perspective on like how him and I assume his family and his people worship, and just like are very, very reverent to Spren. And I don't think we fully know why now, but it's just kind of like like the Spren are just kind of like their gods, I guess. And it's just very like a reverent thing for them. Yeah, it definitely. I don't know. I was a little confused by this chapter, but also like very grateful for it. I feel like we saw a lot about it, a lot of stuff, but I don't know if it answered more questions or gave more questions. Probably
Typical.
gave more questions.
Typical.
Well, there's an obvious question which our characters actually ask halfway through this chapter. Somebody is conspicuously missing here. Did you guys pick this up? Paul, do you know who it is?
Heft? Is that who we're talking about?
It is. Teft is missing. Did you guys pick up on this?
I just had thoughts about like, wow, we haven't seen Teft in a long time.
I had similar thoughts. I was wondering where Teft was, and yeah, the characters are asking, but some of the characters seem to know. Like Kaladin is asking, "Where's Teft?" And then Rock mentions something like, "Oh, he's just now noticing that Teft is gone." Like it almost like everyone else knows where Teft is, but Kaladin doesn't.
And it's either in the Sigil chapter or this chapter where Sigil thinks of it too, where,
Yeah.
Teft wasn't at the morning stew this morning. I hope it's this thing and not this other thing, like that there's certainly something going on that the Bridgemen know about. It's just the thing you don't talk about, like, no, we're not going to talk about it.
And my only guess on this is in my headcanon for Teft, like how I see him. I have an understanding, and I honestly do not recall what this is based on, that there's a possibility that Teft has a gambling problem. There was some mention somewhere about like Teft can't be trusted with money or something like that.
Yes,
And so,
I'm actually really proud of you for remembering that too, because this is way back in the Way of Kings where Kaladin
okay,
gets strung up in the High Storm, and you get like a page of Teft point of view. He's taking care of Kaladin,
yeah,
and he puts the spheres next to Kaladin as like, what if he, just a, kind of a stone, like a Hail Mary play of, what if he could use this? And he does. But he has an offhand comment of, man, I really don't like having spheres. I can't be trusted with them. So that's where you're getting that from.
I think I'm completely extrapolating that, or I'm using that to jump to gambling. Like that's kind of the one thing I can tie to that to say, okay, he's not to be trusted with money. Maybe he has a gambling problem. So that's kind of my only thought, my only guess as to maybe what's happening here is Teft is now relapsed into a gambling addiction. I feel like I'm kind of out on a limb, but that's my only thought.
And it's something that at least Sigil and Rock know about to a point. Like, I don't know if they know everything, but they've certainly had a conversation together of, where's Teft? He's not here. Like, we need to know where he is.
I've been wondering about Teft for a while now, and I'm under the assumption at this point, especially now that it's being alluded to, that it is something bigger. I don't think it's gonna be like, oh, he went gambling or something, unless that ended up playing into something big. But I think he's gonna end up in a lot of trouble, or even some like bad character development that we should be worried about. So I'm very curious to see what happens with him. Maybe he'll get kidnapped by an unmade or something, and they'll have to go save him.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
There's an interesting dynamic here between. Do you think? Okay, let's say Teft did have a gambling addiction. Let's go down this trail for a second. Do you think Kaladin would punish him? Is Kaladin going to, like, within a military structure, going to have like a punishment, and is he going to enforce that type of thing?
If so, it would be on the context of like, you haven't been at whatever training we needed to do or things like that. Not like a you can't gamble kind of thing. Like if he was missing out on responsibilities because of it,
Which he is.
yes,
Whatever it is.
then yeah, then Kaladin would, I imagine.
I agree with you, Paul, with what I think about Kaladin. I could see Kaladin being a stickler for responsibility. If you've made a commitment, you need to stand up to this. But yeah, at the same time, Kaladin's a very broken person, and so I think that he's very good at understanding that other people are broken too. And so I could also see him being fairly understanding in one sense, maybe.
Yeah, just something to think about on the side there. So, Bridge 4 are trying to suck in spheres. Renarin is already there. He's a truth watcher. And so we can actually dive into Renarin here for a second. He kind of shows up to the scene here, Renarin, and he's talking to Rock, and he's saying, well, I can't be in Bridge 4 anymore because you guys are Windrunners, and I'm not a Windrunner. And Rock's like, no, what we're bridge 4. I don't care what order you're in. You're still bridge 4. Like why would that matter? You were a light eyes before. It's not like you were like the same as the rest of us to start with. So what does that even mean to be to be bridge 4? You're still part of it.
And I get what Rock is saying here. Bridge 4 has always been kind of a band of misfits, if you will. Everybody's there, everybody contributes, everybody kind of, everybody's welcome. It's a place of diversity for sure. It's a place where kind of anybody can come in and be a part. And Rock's example is the parchment guy, Relaine.
Yeah.
Well, look at him, Renard. You might think you're the oddball. Well, we've got a parchment with us who is apparently the enemy that we're fighting. But kind of at the same side, on the flip side, I do kind of see Renard's point in that if they're all going to train as Windrunner squires, that kind of builds them up to fulfill a fairly specific role as Windrunners. I feel like in the bigger picture of this, we're going to have 10 different knights, 10 different orders of Knights Radiant, each order having their own kind of specific strengths and their own role that they perform. We've got, the frontline warriors, we've got the protectors, we've got the healers, we've got the strategy, we've got the all those different kinds of things. And so for Renarin as a truth watcher to be kind of in the squad with the Windrunners, is that going to clash a bit? Is that going to be where he's sort of not doing what he's gifted towards or supposed to be doing as a truth watcher? I could see that being the case. So I'm a little confused too as to whether Renarin should be training with them or not.
They all speak the first ideal under like command, which is really weird, which on the flip side actually ends up summoning Spren to be like interested in them, which towards the end of this chapter you see them, but they all are told the words. They don't know them like on their own, like Dalinar and Kaladin and Shallan. Apparently we haven't seen Shallan speak the first ideal, but apparently she did at one point. But they're all told what the first words are. They all say them, and then some Spren show up and they're kind of interested, and Syl has an interesting relationship with them. But do you guys have any questions about like the words and how the rules work there? Like I always thought, like, given the old Knights Radiant, you don't tell each other the words. You have to figure them out for yourself, that type of thing. But here they're just like, all right, here are the words, you say them, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's a bit interesting because I don't understand if if like the power lies in the words themselves, or if it's like the words with your Spren, right, or with that bond. Because I'm under the assumption that it's like the Spren is what makes everything work, and I guess it's saying the words is almost like a command or a notable thing with the Spren that you're with, not like simply saying these words are going to grant you powers. But I don't know.
Yeah, I'm a little confused by the order of operations. Is it you say the first ideal, and then you can get a Spren, and then we'll see if you pass on, or is it you get chosen by a Spren, then you say the first ideal, then you maybe say more ideal? How do the squires fit into this? Do they get Spren? Do they not get Spren? I'm not sure.
Because Syl was attracted to Kaladin before he knew the words, right?
Right.
But these Spren don't show up until the squires say the first ideal. So there's some, which came first, the chicken or the Spren,
Chicken or the chicken Spren?
Yes.
And how do the squires fit into this too? Are they going to get the full powers of a Knight Radiant Windrunner? Are they going to be able to fly? Are they going to be able to stick to stuff? Is that, I guess if that's going to be true, what's the difference? What differentiates a full knight radiant with a squire? And it seems like the immediate answer would be their spren. It seems like Kaladin has Syl. Well, the rest of his squires that have been breathing, some of them have been breathing Stormlight for a little while, at least like Lopin and maybe Sigzil and a few other. They don't appear to have spren. So is that the difference? Maybe? I'm not sure. And Trevor's apparently not going to help me out either.
Nope.
He should. He should just let us know, I think.
Nope.
At this point. I think we did a good job. I think we deserve it.
I deserve this. Let me know. I deserve this.
Yeah. That is interesting. And I think that's part of why, at least right now, I'm honestly not a big fan of squires. It's kind of neat, but it also, like, from my perspective, defeats a little bit of the purpose of the journey we've had with Kaladin. It's like, okay, now that he's done it, they just kind of all do it. Which is just kind of odd. But
there is while I agree with you, Paul, especially from a first-time reader's perspective, this idea of, we've mentioned this before, but the idea of squires is kind of like a gimmick. You know, like, now we need a lot more Knights Radiant, so we're just gonna get a bunch of Knights Radiant for free. But there's limitations where when Kaladin was gone with the Parshmen, none of them could do their powers. So there's some trade-off there, but yeah. Just another note as we're going forward. Hobber, do you guys remember who Hobber is? He's one of the bodyguards who was protecting Elokar when Zeth attacked. He got his legs paralyzed by a shard blade, or dead, or whatever you want to call it, from a shard blade, and he heals himself in this chapter, and he has a really cool scene with Lopin. Lopin gives him the double hand Bridge 4 salute because he has a second arm back, and then Hobber returns it, and it's like a really cool moment between the two of them that they've both been healed. So
it is. I thought that was pretty cool to see Hobber healed. I guess my question with that is he gonna start to have a more significant part? I've kind of understood Hobber as, like, not as notable, and he was just the bodyguard that got hurt because someone needed to get hurt in that situation to add, like, a story impact, I guess.
right.
Of like, wow, this guy lost his legs, like, that's really sad. But yeah, I'd like to see Hobber be more relevant or a bigger thing now. I don't foresee there being, like, any great story development due to Hobber, but it is cool to see, like, that like his body restored with the Stormlight and everything.
Kaladin's reaction to it was interesting, and it kind of ties back to what he and Rock talk about earlier in the chapter. Kaladin's all excited that they're all getting these powers, and because he says, now I don't have to worry about them dying in battle. They're all safe. They're all protected. They're finally protected. They have powers. And I think Rock even says at some point, he's like, no one is fully safe ever, or something like that. I butchered that, but kind of to that effect. So there's kind of this question of Kaladin is fighting so hard to protect his men, but I feel like that's a losing battle. That's a battle that's never ending,
Right.
Trying to protect his men.
You'll eventually lose, right? Because nobody lives forever. So
exactly. And so Rock, I feel like, is kind of pointing out that, hey man, you can't protect everyone all the time. And Kaladin, in typical Kaladin fashion, is like, gosh darn it, I'm gonna. This is an excellent step in protecting them all. They all now have powers. But yeah, interesting continuation of that struggle for Kaladin.
And there's an interesting swap of roles there, because traditionally Rock has been the optimistic one of, like, everything's gonna be fine. Here, come have some soup. It'll be great. And Kaladin's like, no, my life is terrible. It'll always be terrible. And at this point, Kaladin's like, we're finally getting somewhere. They have powers. They're protected. And Rock's the pragmatist here. It's like, well, are they though? Like, we're about to go into a war, and the enemy has powers we're assuming to be similar to us. So you need to have a grain of salt there. So
So if we're ready to move on, we could probably mention Rock's family at least a little bit.
That's what I wanted to bring up.
let's do it. So
Yeah.
I actually really enjoy this scene because Rock, we've never really seen Rock as like a father figure, but he has a family here, and he has this really like, it's certainly emotional for him. It's not emotional for us because we don't really know his family at all, but he has us reuniting with his family, and he's got what, 3-4 kids, and his wife is there, and his youngest daughter, her name is Beautiful Song, is the interpretation there, and she doesn't even recognize him because he's been gone so long. She's 4, and he's been gone for pretty much her entire life, so she recoils from him, and it makes him, it breaks his heart. And I really like this scene because Rock is finally getting some of that payoff that Kaladin has been wanting for all of his men forever, because he knows that some of his men are family men, and they've sacrificed so much to be together and make it work. So he's finally getting some payoff for his men.
I really liked this. I think this was my highlight of this entire episode. Just because it was very like tender and special, and it was really cool to see, especially for Rock specifically, I think. Because Rock, well, it's funny because it goes against his like stereotype, because he's this huge, big, strong, horn eater or whatever, that they're super tough and stuff. But it's just like kind of an emotional scene. And Rock seems to be kind of an emotional guy, which is cool and fun. Um, but yeah, honestly, I had almost forgotten that he was sent to the bridge cruise and all that stuff, and just how much stuff has happened and how long he's been away from his family, and him and his family have probably just been worried sick this whole time. And it's just really cool to see that them reunite and them finally like get together, and I really loved it a lot.
I liked it too. It was also kind of unexpected for me. I feel like the family we've been waiting for to arrive is actually Shalon's family. I've been kind of waiting for, the day they're going to arrive, and here we get Rock's family kind of showing up out of nowhere to join him, and it was a really cool and powerful scene there, but also kind of unexpected, which was fun.
So I said in our previous episode, about which we only covered one chapter from part 2 in our previous episode, one actual chapter, not counting the interludes. And I was saying I was worried about a lot of our content being like almost filler while we wait for the next Sander launch. Um, but I really, really liked this, and I think it was like really good. And I think specifically this part with Rock was very like exciting in like really big scale, and just like a really great thing. I also think of it in like a movie context of like, I feel like this would be kind of maybe not fully a tearjerker, because like we don't know his family and we haven't seen his family really before, but an emotional moment, and it's really cool to see. Um, and I really like that.
Yeah, this would be like the climax of an episode. Like if we're gonna have, a 20 episode season or something. It's not a finale. It's not even a mid-season finale, but it's at least kind of the climax of a chunk of this story here. It did
Definitely.
feel like a meaningful moment.
And then they cap off the chapter with Bridge 4 carrying their bridge, like, one last time, as Rock says, like, we're now windrunners, we're gonna fly, and I'm gonna carry this bridge one last time.
Oh, can I read that real
Yeah,
quick?
go for it.
Well, I thought that was awesome. This is like the last two sentences of chapter 37. Paladin took his place at the front. Together, they carried the bridge on one final run, reverently as if it were the bier of a king being taken to his tomb for his eternal rest. For some reason, I thought that was like, wow, what an interesting little moment there. We've spent, as you mentioned, Trevor, all of Way of Kings, like in the mud with Bridge 4, feeling all their pain, feeling the adversity that they have to overcome. We kind of took a break from that in Words of Radiance, but here in this little end of the chapter in Oathbringer, I feel like we've closed a chapter on our Bridge 4 team. They're no longer Bridgemen. They're probably still going to call themselves Bridgemen in Bridge 4, I bet, because that's kind of their thing. But here they are carrying their bridge for one last time because they've come so far from that. Not only are they no longer slaves, they're not just soldiers, they're squires of the Order of Windrunners in the Knights Radiant. Like, how cool is that? And to kind of close the chapter with that little, symbolic moment was, I thought, really cool.
One other thing I want to say that I just realized from you reading that, and I think what you said was incredible, Elliot. I agree. Like, the development has been just super awesome, but I want to point out the difference in Kaladin's significance at the front. It says Kaladin takes his place at the front, and it sounds very triumphant. But how that was before was being at the front was a death sentence.
Right.
That was, you are going to die. Like, that's the worst place to be. And I think it was really cool to see that. And now it's kind of like a triumphant place with like Kaladin as the head of the group. And that's really, really neat to see.
And if you remember, back in the Way of Kings, the first time Kaladin is set as bridge leader, who does he take the place of at front when he's taking that spot for the first time? Do you remember?
Is it Rock?
It is Rock. He takes Rock's place at the front of the bridge crew that first time and says, I'm bridge leader, I'm taking this front spot. And Rock says, all right, if you want to get killed, go for it. And so that's from that first run where Kaladin's bridge leader to this last one where Kaladin takes Rock's spot at the front is there.
I did not think about it that way, Paul. That was brilliant. That just made it even more awesome in my mind.
It's really good. I didn't think of that until you just read it again there. But I think that's some really cool significance to point out.
I agree. Totally agree.
Any more closing thoughts for episode 65?
My only thought left is just like, not so much about our story, but I think it's kind of funny because we're getting a lot more Bridge 4 content, or at least we did this week. And we're really having to dig deep because all of our connections are like back in the Way of Kings. Because there wasn't that much in Words of Radiance for Bridge 4 that much, and I think it's kind of funny, and so I feel like I'm coming to conclusions slower with that, but it's great. I really enjoyed it, but that was my only thought.
It is really hard because that stuff is 2,000 plus pages ago. Like, trying to remember back that far and make those connections is really difficult. Maybe a minor downside of having a series that's so long and so deep. We enjoy that depth. We love the fact that the story is so big, but a little difficult sometimes to tie it all the way back to those hundreds and hundreds of pages ago. Good stuff, though.
Anything else?
Nada.
Cool. Thank you for joining me, Paul and Eliot. We had some cool Bridge 4 content that I was really happy to share with you guys for this episode. So thanks for joining me for that. Let's read more and talk next week. Thanks for coming.
Laters.
Hasta luego.